of the Political Reform Committee, and I'm serving as chairman of a one-man committee to reconcile, share, and Ogoni. Now, what a lot of these things have done for me is that they've also opened my eyes to the weaknesses of the state, but also the sheer incapacity of those who govern us to wrestle with the problems. And I'm quick to say that the people I've encountered have not encountered evil people who are just doing their best to damage or destroy their country. Yes, there are thieves. Yes, people are stealing. Yes, people are behaving badly. But the truth of the matter is that for us to deal with these problems, it's not enough for us to argue, as some of our Christians have tended to say, let Christians go into politics so that we'll clean up the place. Well, the man in Zambia went in, he didn't quite clean up the place. Obasanjo had a pastor who was praying for him. Had other problems. So, people like to solve a very difficult problem by simply thinking that if a Christian enters the place, he will make it better. And I touched on that point in my paper when I talk about the difficulties that are now arising with the chaplaincies that are springing up from the presidential chapel. Almost every state governor now has a chapel, and in the north, especially among the Muslims, every person has a beautiful mosque in front of their house. But the name they have for those mosques in Hausa is Allah Ganaka, which is God. Here is your own. Allah Ganaka, almost like Paul and the people of going in and suddenly finding and all these altars to the unknown God and so on. So people, it's not for nothing, and I make the point at the end of my paper. We are being called the most religious country in the world. That is what we are. I mean, that's what has been indicated. What are the consequences? How is it that this religiosity is sitting side by side with corruption? We're still, our position is quite high on the transparency, international index measuring corruption. But I think that we need to be a bit humble and, like good old Moses, take off our shoes, because governance in Africa, especially where people have turned failure into an instrument of empowerment, it's not enough. It's not something that we can simply say in another 3-4 years, everything will come and go. And the point that Dr. Sheikh makes about why the Sharia, if you go back to Zamfara, what is very interesting, again I mentioned the point in my paper, the man who started this initiative, he was interviewed the other day. He said, look, you didn't have money. How did you manage to find all this money? He said, well, I was working with the central bank. I was responsible for taking money to the dealer, money for that Nigerian soldiers were to be paid when they were in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, and so on. That was what the desk he was in charge of. And he said, sometimes I took the money, they'll give me $10,000 or $50,000 or whatever for free. But anyway, he recycled himself. He went to Zamfara. Didn't have money, wanted to become governor, and then thought it would be nice to tell people that, if they elected him governor, he would actually introduce Sharia. In fact, when this thing happened, it was larger than what he himself had thought about. And again, I mentioned the point in my paper. The excitement that this generated among ordinary people was actually for a different reason. When you consider that the justice system is not working well in Nigeria, and that it is very expensive for ordinary people to access justice, Sharia made a lot of sense to ordinary people, because they were also hoping that this will be the system that will help, that the first people to have their hands chopped off will be all these criminals and thieves who are in Abuja, whom they have become powerless to arrest. They also thought that
our hands are still there.
They also were of the view that if they live under true Sharia, all these crooks and criminals who have abandoned Zakat, that somehow you will be able to create a social welfare safety net that they will all live, until the women suddenly discovered that they were the first to become victims. The trial of Safia, the subsequent trials, and then the cutting off of the hand of poor Jangabe and so on. So actually, women, among the Muslim women themselves, that was when the resistance started. Poor people began to raise up their hands to say, this is not what we bargained for. What is interesting, and I mentioned in my paper, is that actually the man who started this whole thing, he has had to face the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission like everybody. And like I can make the point yesterday, nobody stole less than the other. Most importantly, right now, the big case in Nigeria against him is he's marrying a 13-year-old girl in Egypt. The people who are in charge of human trafficking are holding him. So it's a wall of its own. But to make the point, if you ask the man, he will say, actually, I didn't start it because I started it because I wanted to win an election, and I won the election. You know, so it was not because if you go to the 12 states of northern Nigeria, it has become a mute point. Nobody talks about it. The man in Kano is trying the best way that he can, but that is because his party, which started off with 7 governors, is now reduced to only one. I think the ANPP, which he belongs to, has only one. So hanging around, holding on to Islam has become an important point. But it's also a good way to get quite a lot of money from Saudi Arabia. On Boko Haram, again, I mentioned it in passing in my paper. Boko Haram, as many of you know, rose from, Boko is the Western education. And Haram, all of you know what Haram is. The simplistic argument was that these guys were saying they didn't like Western education. I did a paper on Boko Haram, and my argument was slightly different. I was actually saying that it was not true that these people would simply say they didn't like Western education. I mean, if you say so, it will be to ask Mrs. Thatcher to define the ANC. Because it's just for her a bunch of terrorists. You ask Ronald Reagan, and he said the ANC was a bunch of terrorists. So, Boko Haram was the name given to them by those who persecuted them, the police, and so on. But even if that was the case, there's nothing wrong, theoretically, with somebody deciding they don't want to go through. The point is made in the paper. There are over 15 million young people in northern Nigeria who are not in Western schools. My argument is that actually what these people were trying to interrogate was the contradiction of the system in which all the thieves that they knew and saw from their governors right down were actually people who had gone through Boko education. And what they were really saying was that if this is what this education is all about, then we really don't want it. It's very difficult to fault that, but I think Bauchi, where it took place, I also made the point in the paper that actually Bauchi had gone through certain processes that led themselves to that vulnerability. One, the governor, the party, the state had belonged to one political party, the PDP. The governor who won the election had defected from the PDP and joined another party in order to contest the election. He had won the election. Midway through, he decided he no longer wanted to belong to the PDP, to the ANPP, marries the president's daughter, and then goes back to the PDP. And the point I make is that that had implications for the nature of the relations within the Muslim community. And finally, the issue of the spillover of whether, frankly, as far as I am concerned, I remember in Kaduna State, as a result of the developments in Nigeria, after the death of the president, when the vice president became president, and then he took our governor as his deputy, as his vice president, thus creating a vacuum, leading to the unprecedented development of the Christian becoming governor of Kaduna State for the first time. I mean, this is what you're talking about. But I think, in fairness, quite a lot has changed in Kaduna and a lot of the states in the north. But I remember one Muslim saying to me after the swearing-in ceremony, he said, look, I hope now that you people are in power, you are not going to do to us what they are doing to us in Jos. The possibility of northerners moving to Ghana, no. I think Nigerians are too proud to do that. Seriously, I mean, like somebody said about Al-Qaeda and suicide bombing and so on. Except when Murtala killed, people always say Nigerians love life so much. They're not going to throw away their life just like that. Murtala couldn't do it. Even Murtala didn't succeed. But I doubt, and my argument is that as we continue to renew our commitment to democracy and democratic processes, we will have to rely on that to create a much more conducive environment for us to relate as citizens.
Somebody asked me, but I don't think we have plenty of time for that, but let me just briefly, again, if you are able to get ourselves out of the box of everything being either Christian or Muslim, and we realize that there are other issues, then I can see a mob coming to destroy my house, not just as Muslims, but as simply a crowd of arsonists who should be properly dealt with. And if government and the security agencies have abdicated the responsibility, then you have no choice. But